Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we're going to do something a little different and focus on one single topic, a very important topic. After one of our correspondents sent me an interesting video link, I noticed a whole stream of comments along the lines of, "I'm a Punjabi Sikh and I hate khalistanis." Well, many of you, I'm sure, have seen similar comments in your surfing of social media. So in today's show, we're going to analyse this whole premise. Are these comments genuine? And if so, why? Are we really just a fringe, irritating minority that most Punjabi Sikhs actually don't want to be a part of? Or is there something a little more sinister at play here? Well, stay tuned, as I'm sure you won't be surprised at what we do uncover. All this and actually not very much more on today's show, but of course loads of your comments, which we'll cover at the end of the show, assuming we'll have some time to cover them, because there's a lot to get through in this segment. So, okay, let's move on. And yes, thank you to one of my correspondents. One of my regular correspondents sent me a link to a video on YouTube. And it was an interview, and it was actually in Punjabi, so to be fair, I couldn't understand a word of it. But what I did do, trying to find a clue of what it was about, I did look through the comments, and the first comment that I hit was this first one: "I'm Sikh and Punjabi, and I hate Khalistan and its supporters." And of course, trawling down the comments, loads and loads of very similar comments aligned with this. And of course, if you spend any time on social media lately, especially looking at news regarding Khalistan, the Khalistan topic, you'll notice a bit of a recurring theme in these comment sections. It's a very specific phrase, almost a mantra, and it goes along the same lines. "I'm a Punjabi Sikh and I hate Khalistanis." So on the surface, it does look like a community that's in the middle of a bit of a civil war here. It looks like a massive wave of internal unhappiness, dissent, whatever you want to call it. But, of course, here, Perspectives, we always don't look at the surface. We try to dig beneath the layers and just find out just what actually is going on. What are the mechanics behind all this? And what I'd like to do in today's show is draw some dots and then try and join those dots together to try and work out just what exactly is going on here. Because what you're seeing isn't just an opinion. It is actually the front line of a very sophisticated two-pronged strategy of psychological and actual physical warfare that's going on here. Now, one prong is digital. It's a massive state-sponsored social media army designed to manufacture a narrative of Sikh division. The second prong is physical. It's in the real world. It's the weaponization of things like organised crime, including, for example, the Lawrence Bishnoi gang, to act as what's called a kinetic proxy, and I'll explain this term in a moment. This proxy, essentially, for the Indian state, carrying out extortions, assassinations, etc., to create a climate of fear that sits with this first prong in the digital sphere. The goal, obviously, to run a global protection racket, to make the Khalistan movement look so dangerous and so gangster-led that the average, hard-working, ordinary Sikh family wants nothing to do with it. But, to be factual, we have to look at some uncomfortable truths as well. Not every comment is a bot. Not every one of these is a Hindutva bot. There is a segment of the Sikh population in Punjab, here in the diaspora, who are not connected to the Khalistan movement. Some are doing it out of trauma, a deep-seated trauma from the 1980s. Others are doing it out of just sheer survival. Because when you're struggling to, for example, put food on the table or even fighting a drug epidemic in Punjab, political sovereignty just feels like a luxury that people don't, frankly, have time to care about. So today, in today's show, I'm going to strip away the propaganda. We're going to look at the prison of India that shapes these minds from birth. We're going to show you how the Indian state is using the good old divide and rule 2.0, yes, post-British Empire, the divide and rule playbook, to ensure that all of us are just too busy fighting each other in these comment sections to see actually what's going on behind the scenes, who's actually pulling these strings. So, stay with me in today's show. This is the reality behind the anti-Khalistan narrative. So let's start joining some dots. So dot one, as we call it, the social media army. Let's get into the mechanics of these comments. If you see thousands of messages saying pretty much the same thing, you have to ask, look, is it a movement or is it coming from something a little bit more manufactured? Is it coming from some sort of bot factory? Well, the fact is, India is officially the world's capital for disinformation. According to the World Economic Forum's 2024 Global Risks Report, highlighted here, India is the #1 country at risk for misinformation. Now, it's no accident this, it's an industry. The ruling BJP, Modi and his army, operate what is known as IT cells. This isn't speculation, conspiracy, it's fact. The BJP operate IT cells, vast armies. Research from the Washington Post and Time magazine, for example, revealed a digital army of over 150,000 social media workers who operate 24/7 round the clock with a simple mission: to capture the mind of the voter, to demonise anyone who doesn't fit the Hindutva narrative. So when you see a comment saying, I'm a Sikh and I hate Khalistanis, quite often you are looking at what's called digital ethnography. They're basically fake accounts, usually with no history, created specifically to pose as Sikhs, to create a false sense of internal division. The Oxford Internet Institute, another organisation, tracked this computational propaganda for years. And it's designed, as they concluded, to demobilise opposition and also to create false support for government narratives. But here's another dot that they don't want you to connect. Why go to all this effort if the Khalistan movement has no support? If the movement was truly dead, if it truly was this fringe movement that they often paint it as, they wouldn't need 150,000 trolls to tell you it's dead. And there's loads of evidence to support otherwise. Particularly, the truth came out in the last general election. The 2024 Lok Sabha elections shattered the Indian state's narrative. Yeah, this guy. There you go. Despite being locked in a jail 3,000 kilometres away in Assam, in Dibrugarh jail, despite a month-long internet blackout in Punjab, despite being unable to campaign for a single day because he was locked up, Amritpal Singh won the Kadur Sahib seat with a staggering majority, an unprecedented majority of 197,000 votes. He didn't just win, he secured the largest victory margin in all of Punjab on a pro-Khalistan ticket. At the same time, Sarabjit Singh Khalsa, the son of Shahid Bhai Beant Singh, won the Faridkot seat with nearly 300,000 votes. Both men campaigning on a platform of Sikh sovereignty and human rights, amongst many other things. The success of Amritpal's political party, Akali Dal Waris Punjab Day, shows that the grassroots support for Khalistan isn't just present, it is massive. But here's the hard reality. Outside the ballot box, people are frightened into silence. In a state where the government can shut down the internet for 30 million people just to catch one guy, remember that witch hunt of when they tried to get hold of Amritpal Singh a couple of years ago? They closed down the internet for 30 million people just to catch one guy. Where the young are being picked up under the National Security Act for simply having a certain flag. Where the Bishnoi gang over in Canada is used as a shadow police force. Publicly supporting Khalistan is, of course, dangerous. People are afraid to stick their heads above the parapet. So the next time that you see those anti-Khalistan comments, remember this election. Those hundreds of thousands of votes were cast in silence behind a curtain away from the eyes of the IT cells. That was the real voice of Punjab and Punjabi Sikhs. Comments? That's just the noise of the machinery trying to make you forget what happened at those polls. So let's move on to dot number 2, the second dot. The Bishnoi connection. And if you listen to the Indian mainstream media, the Godi media, they have a very specific narrative for why Sikhs in the diaspora are allegedly pulling away from the movement. They call it gang culture. They point to drive-by shootings in Canada, extortion in California. I've reported it regularly, those sorts of stories. And they use this and they say, look, those Khalistanis, they're all just thugs. But the fact is the Indian state doesn't want you to know this. They're the ones obviously hiring the thugs. It's Lawrence Bishnoi and his gang. He's currently sitting in a high security prison in Gujarat, over in India. But he still reportedly runs a criminal syndicate of over 700 thugs globally. How does a man in a government-controlled jail manage to orchestrate international assassinations? Because he's not just a gangster. He is this, what I called a kinetic proxy for the Indian state. Let me just quickly explain what that phrase means. Kinetic proxy. Kinetic means literally force, direct force. Proxy, you know this term, it is acting on behalf of. It gives plausible deniability to the Indian government. In other words, the Indian government can directly hit physically Khalistanis through violence, through their proxy, through the Bishnoi gang, and then have this deniability ability. They can say, oh, it wasn't us, it was these gangsters. That's kinetic proxy. In October 2024, the RCMP took the unprecedented step of naming the Bishnoi gang as a tool of the Indian government. They didn't mince words. Mike Doohan, the character we talk about and have talked a lot about in the last week or two, Commissioner Mike Doohan, head of the RCMP, said the Indian diplomats were using criminal networks to target Sikh dissidents with, as he said, homicides, extortions and arsons. So let's look at the patterns here. In 2023, Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar, shot down, gunned down outside his Gurdwara in Surrey. In August 2024, Satinder Pal Singh Raju, an associate of Nijjar, survived a terrifying assassination attempt on a California highway near Sacramento. That was, again, I covered that story at the time, when his truck was sprayed with bullets. Now, these weren't random crimes. They are basically surgical strikes against the leadership of the Khalistan movement. And it goes a lot deeper than just these very high-profile incidents. It's basically, as I said in the intro, it's a global protection racket. By using gangs like Lawrence Bishnoi to carry out these drive-by shootings, the extortions that even the FBI are warning the diaspora about, that are targeting the Sikh business owners particularly, the Indian state is achieving two things. Firstly, it is removing vocal activists. It's removing the high-profile Khalistani campaigners. And secondly, a little bit more insidiously, it's all about reputation destruction. They're making the entire Khalistan movement look like a law and order issue. They want the average Sikh in Vancouver, California, anywhere in the diaspora to think, if I support Khalistan, I'm inviting gangsters into my life. So it's a very deliberate strategy to manufacture fear and turn the community against itself. It's the old divide and rule, remember? And whilst the Indian state points the finger at extremism, the Department of Justice in the US has, as we know, unsealed indictments linking Indian government agents, Vikas Yadav, infamously now well known, directly to these murder-for-hire plots. Gurpatwant Singh Panoon, that whole assassination plot. It is this divide and rule playbook for the 21st century. They hire the killer, they pay for the bullets, the weapons, and then they use their media to tell you that the victim was a criminal. So it's time we stopped calling this gang violence and started calling it exactly what it is. It's state-sponsored terrorism on foreign soil. So let's move on to dot number 3. Genuine dissent. So we've looked so far at this kinetic proxy, as the phrase describes it. We've looked at the bots, the bullets, the very much the frontline anti-Khalistan stuff going on. But let's be balanced about this. We have to look at the people and some of the genuine people behind some of these comments. When we see a Sikh genuinely and uncoerced saying that they don't want to have anything to do with the Khalistan movement, okay, we have to ask the question, okay, why? What is stopping you supporting what actually should naturally come to you as a supporter of the Khalistan movement? There are two big factors at play here. there's what's called transgenerational trauma and economic apathy. Big words. I'll talk about those. Let's explain. Firstly, transgenerational trauma. It's basically trauma. For a generation that lived through the 1980s and the 1990s, there's terrible times in Punjab. The word khalistan, it's not just a political ideal. It's a trigger. Of course, there are those alive today who remember those awful times, the genocides, the extrajudicial murders, those black days of the 1980s and 1990s. It was a period of police brutality, extrajudicial killings, a whole generation of disappeared youth. It was a terrible time. In Punjab, in the prison of India, essentially, the state has spent 40 years reinforcing one single narrative, that seeking sovereignty, khalistan, leads only to blood, to violence, to torture, to death, to horror, to trauma. They successfully linked the dream of freedom to this memory of a massacre. So for many of the older generations in Punjab, the silence isn't a lack of love for the whole concept of khalistan. It's just an innate, desperate desire to protect their own family members, their grandchildren, from that historic trauma, from the torture of a state that they barely survived, that they were the survivors they got through. It's a natural human condition to protect the next generation from their own trauma. And also there's the reality of life on the ground today. So the diaspora does talk about borders, but the people in Punjab actually have got bigger things to worry about in their day-to-day lives. They're worried about putting food on their table, keeping a roof over their heads. And this, of course, comes to now the current state of Punjab. And again, a subject I've gone at great length about to talk about in some of my podcasts. So many factors now hitting Punjab hard. Punjab is facing a multi-dimensional crisis. There is a huge debt trap going on at the moment. Small farmers, we talk about the farmers' protest, farmers are living on less than 50 rupees a day. They are being bombarded by Modi's corporate juggernaut, these oligarchs, the billionaires, the corporate farmers who want to put them out of business. So they're barely surviving. We have this ecological disaster, something again I touch on regularly. The water table issue. Every drought season, they can't irrigate the crops. There's the flooding in the monsoon season because of mismanagement, deliberate mismanagement by Delhi. The soil itself is dying from decades of pollution, chemical monoculture, mismanagement again. And then, of course, we have what's called the chitta epidemic, the drug crisis, which is gutting an entire generation of Sikh youth. Now, we all know who's behind all that. That's a separate story which I talk regularly about. But ultimately, that is what the average family in Punjab is facing. So when a family has to choose between paying off debt or saving a child from addiction, things like a political movement, the whole khalistan premise, and especially one portrayed by the media as gangster-led, it feels it's a bit of a luxury or a dangerous distraction. They've got bigger things to worry about in their day-to-day lives. And this is what the Indian state counts on. They know that a hungry, addicted, traumatised population is easier to control than a prosperous and confident one. The Indian state has deliberately nurtured a prison of the mind, where the average Sikh, the average Punjabi, feels that the status quo is the only way to survive. I don't want to change things because it might get even worse. That's the state of mind that has been indoctrinated into Punjabis now. Now, we have to respect this experience, this lived experience, but you've got to see it for what it is. It is a byproduct of a state that has spent literally decades breaking the spirit of its most productive people. So they stay too busy surviving to ever even dream of thriving and being free. And talking of a state breaking the spirit of its people. Dot number 4. The classroom as a battlefield. So, yeah, we can talk about the drug epidemics, the economic debts, but there is, and again we've touched on this in the past, as indeed some of our correspondents have, There is a more subtle, a more insidious, a long-term operation happening inside the four walls of every classroom in the Punjab. If you want to control a people, you don't just take the land, you take their history, you take their culture, you take their tongue, their language. What we're seeing in Punjab is a systematic saffronisation of education across that state. For at least a generation, the NCERT, N-C-E-R-T, that's the body that sets India's school curriculum, has been rewriting textbooks to deliberately align with the Hindu Rashtra narrative, or this United India narrative. In 2023, the NCERT officially removed references to the demand for a separate Sikh nation and khalistan from Class 12 political science textbooks. They didn't just remove the word, they fundamentally misrepresented one of the key elements in Sikh history, the Anandpur Sahib Resolution, back in the 1970s. What they're doing is they're stripping away the political aspirations of the entire Sikh people and replacing it with a narrative of regional autonomy within a monolithic Hindu state. In other words, you are Indians, you're not Punjabis, you're not even Sikhs, you're Indians. Sikh history is being subtly subsumed. The gurus are increasingly portrayed not as sovereign, spiritual and political leaders who challenge the Delhi throne amongst any other oppression and injustice, but as defenders of Hinduism. I've seen it myself on social media. The Hindutva people, when you look through the social media comments, the gurus, they were actually Hindus. They were defenders of Hinduism. And so by framing Sikhism as a branch of a larger Hindu tree, the state's teaching our children, Sikh children, that their identity is secondary. It is a subset of a larger national identity that doesn't actually represent them. And it's not just what they learn, but how they speak. There is, of course, a deliberate push, as often reported on Perspectives, to replace Punjabi with Hindi. In many private and even state schools, students are discouraged from speaking Punjabi. We're seeing a trend of teachers being brought in from outside Punjab, from the Hindi heartland, who don't even speak Punjabi, don't speak a word of Punjabi. So when a child can't speak their mother tongue, Punjabi, in their own school, they're losing the key to their own scriptures and, of course, to their own history and culture. You want some evidence of this? Yes, here on Perspectives. Thank you, Harpreet. Remember this? We covered this comment about a week ago. Harpreet talks about the real lived experience, how at school she saw firsthand what was going on, saw firsthand parents attending funerals of those who were killed in these extrajudicial killings. Talk about Bhindranvale, who was basically written out of the school curriculum. Songs that were indoctrinated into the children, that they were forced to sing, that had lyrics of finding Bhindranvale. You couldn't understand why you had to sing that song. You're forced to think country first, it's India first, Hindu Rashtra. But bless Harpreet, she saw the truth. She's now a Khalistani. Because once the truth comes out, of course you become naturally a Khalistani. So this is what's happening firsthand in Punjab. Indoctrination of the young. Now, it's not a new strategy, this. We've seen this. I've seen it firsthand myself. It's a classic colonial playbook used to dismantle dissent. It's been used, for example, in Tibet. Recently, the Chinese government moved nearly 1 million Tibetan children into state-run boarding schools where they were forced to speak Mandarin and taught to love the Chinese motherland above their own culture. A very successful strategy. Now Tibet has been subsumed into China, and the Tibetan youth are pro-China. In East Turkestan, another example, the erasure of the Uyghur language, the re-education of the youth in vocational centres, again, very insidious. Chinese, it was the Xinjiang strategy, as it's known. Again, designed to create harmonious, by that read, obedient, young population who are pro-China. Bizarrely, we even had it here in the European Union, in Europe, when the EU was controlling Europe, and when the UK was part of the EU, I saw it firsthand. Textbooks rewritten in our schools to indoctrinate our children into being, we are European, we love the European Union. We're not British, we are European. Again, it's a classic playbook. And of course in India, in the prison of India, the bars of that prison are basically made of these textbooks. So by the time the average Sikh child reaches adulthood, they have had a lifetime being subtly indoctrinated to view secessionism as terrorism and their own sovereign history as a dangerous episode of history. This is why the 2024 election results actually were such a shock to Delhi. Despite years of this educational scrubbing, this indoctrination, the spirit of Punjab survived. Not just survived, but is clearly thriving. But make no mistake, the state is playing a very long game on this. They know how to play this game very well. They're waiting for the generation that has forgotten how to speak Punjabi and has only ever read the government's version of the Guru's lives to come of age. So if we don't protect education in the Punjab, we lose the future before that fight's even begun. Let's move on to dot number 5. And actually, in many ways, this is one of the more insidious, one of the more dangerous dots. This is indifference. Now, we've covered the bots, the bullets, the indoctrination, what's going on in Punjab. But there is an element that actually we do have to face up to, and we have to be honest about this. There is another factor at play, and it is perhaps actually one of the most difficult ones to confront, and that is this word apathy. I've seen it myself. Apathy is basically people who just don't care. I remember recently I had some furniture delivered from a Sikh company, actually, here in the UK, Sikhs. They delivered some furniture. And these two young Sikh lads, with their dastars, I said, hey, what do you guys feel about Khalistan? I was curious. Khalistan? I don't know. I have no opinion on it. They just almost didn't even know about it. They just didn't care about it. Interesting. It was a bit of an insight, actually. It was a bit of a lesson to me, because I assumed every Sikh was passionate about Khalistan. No, they're not. There is an element of apathy. But it's not just applicable to Sikhs. It's a human condition. It's actually a documented reality of the human condition, not just Punjab, but for all of us. Most people just simply don't care about politics until it obviously knocks on their front door and it affects them directly. We see it in every Western democracy. Now, I've got this is just a graph I just sort of picked just at random, but just to illustrate actually what's going on. This is the voter turnout here in the UK at elections, but it's reflected, it's mirrored across certainly every Western democracy. Even here in stable countries, 30 to 40% of our population usually choose not to participate in elections. They just don't care enough. Because for the average person, politics is just a distant noise compared to their immediate, visceral needs of daily life. You know, they care about paying the mortgage, finding a good school for the kids, saving for retirement, all these sorts of everyday matters that actually, frankly, are more important in our minds every day. That's why disengagement is so obvious. And in the diaspora, this apathy is really amplified by what's called, and I've referred to this regularly, it's called the comfortable cage. And many Sikhs in the West have obviously worked very hard to integrate and build prosperous lives. They've achieved their Western dream, in the large part, but that success often comes with a bit of a subconscious fear of making trouble. A lot of Sikhs worry about if they're being vocal about sovereignty, if they're campaigning for something like Khalistan or human rights in India, that comes with a potential cost. For example, they know, and again, something I reported on, they know that there is a fear they won't be able to visit elderly relatives back in Punjab because they might lose their visa, a typical tactic of India. They also know that, for example, Indian intelligence agents are monitoring Gurdwaras, community events, right across the diaspora. So they're worried about being surveilled by India. What is the impact? What is the cost of that? And then, of course, there's the social element. There is, of course, a human desire to fit in with your social circle, to not be seen as the radical, by their Sikh neighbours or non-Sikh neighbours or work colleagues or whatever. So again, there's almost this sort of fear, I don't want to sort of put my head above the parapet and being labelled as some sort of, activist or radical or whatever. So there's that social stigma attached to it. And the Indian state understands this psychology perfectly. And this is what they're really using to their advantage. They don't need to turn every diaspora Sikh into a supporter of the BJP. All they need to do is just to turn your average Sikh into an apathetic bystander, somebody who just doesn't care. That's all they need to achieve. So when you combine this natural human indifference to politics with a targeted campaign of transnational oppression, the assassinations, the hit lists, you're creating a very chilling effect. The silent majority stays silent, not because they disagree with the cause, but because the cost of speaking up just feels too high compared to their comfort of their ordinary, current, everyday lives. It's basically the same silent indoctrination that we see in other cultures. And in the West, we're taught that radical is a bad word. We're taught that stability is the ultimate goal. So when the Indian state uses its media to label the Khalistan movement as destabilising, they're speaking directly to the fears of the middle-class diaspora, the comfortable middle class. We don't want to rock the boat. We've all got too much to lose to appear to be radical and potentially lose what we've built in our lives. And this indifference is really the internal enemy. It is this wall of silence that allows the bots, the gangs, to operate with impunity. Because if the community does not stand together, if it doesn't unite together, if this silent majority chooses comfort over bringing out the truth and highlighting what's really going on, then the Indian state has already won without firing a single shot in the streets. So the question we have to ask ourselves, is our comfort worth the erasure of Sikh identity? Because while we enjoy the peace of the West, the machinery back in Punjab, in India, is working 24/7 to make sure the next generation of Sikhs doesn't even know what they've lost. That is really significant. So let's move on to the final dot. And this really is how we fight back. How do we move from the comfortable cage of apathy to a much better position of strength? It all starts with understanding the science of revolution. Now, my recent podcast, which I hope you all watched with Dr. Grewal a week or two ago, this 3.5% magic number we talked about, we discussed with Dr. Grewal a concept. It came from Harvard University called the 3.5% rule. Basically, research into over 100 years of history shows you don't need 100% of a population to topple an authoritarian regime. You only actually need, scientifically proven, 3.5% of a population actively participating, that's the key words, actively participating in non-violent resistance. That's all it takes to effectively bring about Khalistan. So think about the numbers there. For Punjab, that's roughly 1 million people. So when 3.5% of the people withdraw their consent, and that can be through many ways, through general strikes, boycotts, civil disobedience, the state becomes dysfunctional. They run out of handcuffs. They don't literally have enough handcuffs. They can't arrest enough people. They run out of jail cells. The whole moral authority evaporates. This is what brings down regimes and has been shown right across the world throughout history. It only takes 3.5% of a population basically to say no to bring down a regime. And we're already seeing the momentum build. We've seen at the Khalistan referendum, over 1.5 million Sikhs so far have already stood in line for hours in the rain and the cold to cast their vote, probably for Khalistan. That, isn't indifference. That is a massive organised withdrawal of consent from the Indian state. Sadly, not in India itself, but it is representative, and it is more than likely represented in Punjab. So the way we fight apathy is by showing people that their participation is the leverage. It's the leverage that we need. We don't need to fight the state's strength. We need to exploit its weakness. The Indian state is terrified of your vote, of your voice, which is why they are spending millions every year on bots and these Lawrence Bishnoi gangsters to shut you up. So when we see the huge turnouts at referendums, the landslide victories of Amritpal Singh, we're seeing the 3.5% in action. The silent majority is waking up. The bars of the prison of India are now starting to dissolve. So our job is simply just keep showing up, keep voting, keep protesting, keep campaigning, keep being active, and most of all, keep refusing to be intimidated into silence. So let's conclude and join some of these dots. The Indian state is running a global protection racket. They're using these bots to manufacture a narrative of Sikh self-hatred. They're using gangsters like Lawrence Bishnoi to create a climate of fear across the diaspora. They're using school textbooks to erase Sikh history, Punjabi language and Sikh culture from the minds of Sikh children. They want you to look at those YouTube comments and feel alone. They want you to look at the gang violence and feel ashamed. They want you to look at the economic crisis in Punjab and feel defeated. But the reality is the opposite. The state is doing all of this because, as I say over and over again, they know they are losing. They are losing the war. The Khalistan movement is winning the war. The Indian state knows that when that 3.5% threshold is reached, the prison of India collapses. It's all over. India breaks up. So the choice is yours. You can stay in the comfortable cage of apathy, watch Sikh identity be erased, or you can recognise the Sikh people are really the power. So don't let a bot in an IT cell or a gunman in a state-controlled jail tell you who you are. The referendum results, when they come out, the 2024 elections have already told us the truth. The Khalistan movement is alive. It is very much alive. It is pushing sovereignty, and it is no longer afraid to be heard. So there you go. I hope that back to the opening part, when you see these comments, I am a Sikh Punjabi, I hate Khalistanis. There's a lot more to the story, as hopefully you now understand. So there you go. On that note, let's move on to our comments column. Thank you, everybody, as always, to our wonderful audience for all your contributions, and huge contributions. A lot of comments over the last couple of videos. Had a lot of engagement, which is great to see. So thank you, all of you. Cam K said, yes, absolutely. Hindutva organisations across Canada are staunch supporters of violence. Yeah, of course, they're proxies. It's Hindutva all over again. They should be ashamed of what they're up to. But the key point here is peaceful movement for liberation of Khalistan Zindabad. Yes, it is a peaceful movement. That is the key phrase that we must keep repeating and repeating. It is not associated with violence, it is peaceful. And Sane Human, who's been having great fun over the last few days, being critical wherever he or she can be. Where is this place called Khalistan? Come on, we've answered that question several times over the last few days. So stop asking the question. Come up with something a little bit more original, Sane Human, and we'll be happily answering your questions. Minder Singh. Yeah, when the truth came out, just accidentally, almost leaked out in that video of John Kiriakou in that interview that it was indeed India behind the Air India bombing. Yes, Minder Singh, you remember when you were a child, you remember your father telling you when it happened, Sikhs would never kill innocent people. It totally flies in the face of anything that a Sikh believes in. So, as you say, your whole family are not from India, but we understand what Sikhs are. But again, even just common sense evidence says there is no way that Sikhs could have been behind a bombing like this. They wouldn't kill over 300 innocent people. And there were children on that flight as well. There's no way Sikhs would have been behind that. So even common sense says that. Let's Revolt says, Sikhs knew it. We were just waiting for someone to burst the bubble. And here it is, loud and clear. But the question is, how many more bubbles is this guy going to burst before he becomes a bit of a target? Indeed, I think he has to be very, very careful. You've seen what happened to Julian Assange, for example, another great whistleblower who brought the truth to the people of what the governments, our own governments, were up to. And look what happened to him. He's had a terrible time. So yes, I hope John Kiriakou is careful. And Khalistani, 95, I think really just sums it up beautifully. India is a terrorist state. Yeah, who are the real terrorists? The evidence points in only one direction. Happy U13. Sikh community have always known. Absolutely they have. It was false flag, of course it was. But even CSIS knew. The CIA clearly knew about it, which means the rest of Five Eyes intelligence obviously knew about it. And this is why the RCMP tapes got destroyed. They wanted to hide the evidence. You even refer back to that awful situation of the Bhopal gas incident when thousands of Indians died, awfully, poisoned. When it was Union Carbide. I remember watching the news. It's horrific. I was young in those days, and I remember seeing it on the news. Terrible. But even that was planned by the Indian government to push back the United States from the 1984 Sikh genocide. I actually hadn't heard that theory, but yeah, I mean, we know the playbook. It wouldn't surprise me. The truth will come out eventually. Well, will it? I hope it will. But ultimately, the truth does always prevail. So, Amakara, thank you for this answer. This is part of a longer comment, but I took the key element here, which is basically thank you, because I said when I talked about the hatred and this provocation towards violence in many holy scriptures. The Bible has it. I know the Quran has it. There's all sorts of quotes from many holy scriptures that were written, obviously, in a very different time, that encourage violence against the religion's enemies. As I said, it's defensible because it was written in a time when that was a pretty standard method to defend your religion. But of course, in the context of today, it does look a bit strange. But as you say, Amakara, I did say, I said, please let me know if in the Guru Granth say, gee, there must surely be something similar. But you say, absolutely not. There is zero violent messages or any calls to aggression. Not a single part promotes hatred, harm, holy war, or violence of any kind. I'm delighted, frankly, I'm not surprised, but I'm delighted to hear that confirmation. So thank you, Amakara, for letting us know that is actually the case. The core message, as you say, is purely devotional. Love for one formless God, equality, etc. It condemns ego, greed, oppression, ritualism, but praises compassion and fearlessness in the face of injustice. Absolutely, there it is, in black and white. Punjab. Again, a long, detailed comment. Let me just quickly paraphrase what you're saying here. This again was about my piece about what's going on between Sikhs and Muslims. And you've sort of evolved this discussion into actually a lot of big topics, really. But again, let me just quickly summarise. Basically, there is this fake narrative, again, coming from the Hindus, or Hindutva primarily, that Sikhs and Muslims have always been at war, even since the time of the Mughals, actually saying no. That is not the case. The evidence actually says otherwise. It was essentially Sikhs were not fighting Muslims. They were fighting those mirrored through history. That Sikhs, and it actually echoes against Hindus. Sikhs are not anti-Hindu. They're anti-Hindutva, or most of us are. In other words, we've got to be very careful who we target, who is the actual enemy. It is not Muslims. It is not general population of Muslims who are, on the whole, decent, law-abiding, decent people. It is a small subset of extremists. And certainly when it comes to grooming gangs, as you say, it is a small subset of these people. Afghans, I say it's not just Pakistanis, it's Afghans. You refer to one specific case. Even that one I covered recently with Sher Punjab. It was an Afghan man who was grooming a young Sikh girl who was arrested, and I showed the video at the time. That was only, a month or two ago. That was an Afghan, etc., etc., etc. In other words, please be careful, as you rightly say, a very timely warning. If you drop off and pick up your girls from schools, please teach them about the dangers about keeping secrets and about anyone approaching them. Yeah, obviously common sense. And it's not just Muslims, it could be anyone. Indeed. And this, and again, the John Kiriki, the fallout from this interview is massive. You pick up another piece, which I just touched on when I covered that, is of course that interview wasn't just about Air India. He referred to India supporting and being involved in the Kashmiri militants, and actually, again, a lot of false flag operations going on in Kashmir. Well, we know about Chichen Singh Pura, but of course, it immediately brings to mind the Pahalgam attacks, which many of us said at that time that the Pahalgam attack last year must have been, or was more likely, a false flag for this very same reason. And again, you've picked it up, and it's clearly picked up by John Kiriaki, who highlights the very likelihood that even Pahalgam was false flag. Thank you, Punjab, for your comment. Right, here's an old chestnut, as we call it. Thank you, the King Hunter. Now, I had to translate, obviously use Google Translate, what your comments say. For those who can't read Punjabi, I'll read this to you in the translation, because I had to do it myself. Punj has no meaning, so please write the correct name of our beautiful country. Punjab, it's PA, Panjab. You can see the Persian language from which the name Panjab of Punjab came. Even in Persian, it's spoken and written as Panj, not Punj. Panjab University, 1947 logo, also has the correct name of the country, Punjab, written Panjab, PA, in its logo. Even Sidhu Musiwala's song, look at the correct name of Panjab, written in English with PA. The correct name, PA, will be written as Panjab. Sometimes it is changed and called Punjab. So your point, thank you, the King Hunter, is it really should be Panjab. Now, we've had this discussion before. We have covered this topic in great detail before. And yeah, it is. It probably is technically, and I think as you provide the evidence, it probably is Panjab. But here in the UK and the West, we've always called it Punjab. It's been anglicised into Punjab. It's a little bit like Sikh. It's, I say tomato, you say tomato. You know, it's... the point is, the reality is, practically speaking, you know what I mean when I say Punjab. I always do like to be correct, and I'll try and remember to call it Panjab. But ultimately, here in the UK, and certainly across the West, Westerners always refer to it as Punjab. So I will endeavour, thank you, the King Hunter, for highlighting this fact. Thank you for your comments and supporting research to say why it's Panjab. And you probably, well, not probably, I'm sure you are definitely correct. It should be Panjab. It's just after a lifetime of being indoctrinated myself into Punjab, I've always called it Punjab. So I will endeavour in future to try and call it Panjab. You watch, next slide, I'll call it Punjab. Anyway, hopefully you're not offended if we get it wrong, but ultimately I will try to keep calling it Panjab. Parbati Bernard, show the clips of what you're saying. Now, thank you for this comment. And I totally sympathise with what you're saying. It would be, in an ideal world, when I talk about subjects, I would have next to me, scrolling here, videos relevant to what I'm talking about. And, of course, I'd have amazing coverage. In reality, of course, I'm a one-man band. I'm here in the UK. I'm just a satellite of Satellite TV. I'm on my own. I am running this whole ship all by my lonesome. And so I do what I can. And, of course, it takes all day, every day, to prepare the following day's show. So firstly, I don't have the time to collect as much visual material as I would like. Secondly, I don't have, as normally is in the case of TV channels and news shows, is they have at least one other person behind the scenes pressing buttons, doing things. I have to do it myself. I've got to look and press buttons to change stuff and do stuff like that. I don't have somebody behind the scenes operating the cameras. And and changing the views, etc. I've got to do it all myself. So I've got to do something that runs contrary to being a man. That is multitasking. I've got to do about 5 things at once, which is why I quite often get it wrong. So apologies. Anyway, that's one reason why I don't have a huge array of wonderful visual material to go along. You have to look at my ugly face and listen to my voice. The other reason is quite often it's very hard to find videos. Not just hard to find it. Secondly, there's a copyright issue. If I use copyright media, copyright videos, which most frankly are, we get a warning on YouTube, 3 strikes, and that's it. The channel closes down. So we can't take the risk of breaching people's copyright. So again, we don't have the funds to buy in expensive copyrighted news reels, much as we'd love to do that. And please feel free to sponsor the show. If you're a company with some funds you'd love to sponsor us and improve the visual appearance of the show, by all means, please send me an email, message@satlogetv.com. Let me know. I'll be delighted to let you sponsor our channel. That could help improve the overall quality of it. But anyway, as I say, we do what we can. So I'm sorry if you feel a bit disappointed, but we do hope you stay with us and listen to my voice and look at my ugly mug instead. And you'll have to use your imagination. Picture it in your brain. James is back. Hello, James. ProPix TV is James, for those who might not know. Yes, absolutely. James and I talked a lot about the Air India bombing during our shows. And, of course, very relevant story to James. He's given a lot of information in the past about it. So, of course, unsurprisingly, James is delighted to see, finally, that the truth is leaking out. But, of course, we have this call for the investigation to be reopened, for a new investigation. As James rightly says, a lot of the investigators were turned away. A lot of the evidence was deliberately disappeared, let's call it, just to try and protect the various stakeholders. Anyway, but James does send his best wishes from Canada. And hopefully, if you're at the Vaisakhi parade, I think that's in Brampton, is it, James? If you're at the Vaisakhi parade on the 17th, go see James. He might even put you on camera, send me the footage. So if you want to appear on the show, I would be delighted to show any of our correspondents, if you're in James's neck of the woods. Get on camera, talk to James, say hello to him. And James will send me the footage. And who knows, you could be the next star of Perspectives. How fun. Sufty muffins. All Punjabi lorry drivers and taxi drivers, please share. Not just lorry drivers and taxi drivers, everybody, please share. We need to get the word out there. We're fighting this huge monolithic machine of India and its IT capabilities to shut channels like us down. We are banned from India. We're closed down, we're shut down. They've demonetized us successfully. They're attacking us from every angle. We see comments disappearing. We see views down because they've twisted somehow the algorithm. Their agents at Google have managed to do something to the algorithm to throttle our channels. So it's up to you guys to keep the numbers up, to keep us going. We rely on you. This is why it's not me, it's you guys that are responsible for the success of our channel, and why I thank you on a regular basis for that. Charming hope. Truth will ultimately prevail, where there are pains to bring it to light. Quote from George Washington. How absolutely true. The truth will prevail. It is a mantra that I repeat regularly on this show, because it does. The truth always comes out in the end. And charming hope, thanks, Sikhs for Justice, all pro-Khalistani groups, media houses, journalists, even the Sikh Panth, for those who are going to huge, literal pain in many cases to bring the truth. And I love this sign-off. The great guru, bless y'all. I think it's very clear where you're from, Charming Hope. And a big hello to you guys. I guess that's Texas or Southern States somewhere. Anyway, yes, indeed. Blessings to y'all. And of course, the final blessing to y'all comes from Darshang Singh Bra this time. My Punjabi coming on in leaps and bounds. Khalistan Zindabad. Indeed, that is what the show's all about. So yes, indeed, that does bring us to a close for the day. And indeed, actually for the week. Podcast tomorrow, Dr. Singh Grewal is a fascinating one again. It's all about financial shenanigans, if you know that word. Basically, financial jiggery-pokery, financial machinery, financial weapons that the Indian state is using to target minorities, to shut down the Sikh community, to shut down khalistan, the Khalistan movement in India. It's another weapon that the Indian state are using. Financial instruments is what they're using this time. Fascinating topic. Do watch that. It'll be uploaded tomorrow. But that's it for another day, another week. Do keep your comments coming in. Thank you for all your support. Thanks for all your comments. Do leave me a comment on anything that you'd like me to know about. How you feel. Don't like anything, let me know. But of course, do send me emails, as many of you have been doing, so thank you for that. Of course, at message@sutledertv.com, I do read all your emails. Thank you for all your contributions. But that's it. Have a great weekend, everybody. God willing, I will see you tomorrow for the podcast and Monday for the next Perspective show. Have a great rest of the week.